Welcome to the Morris County Chamber of Commerce presentation. This one's going to cover business continuity, a plan of action, and practical considerations. I'm going to rely on, I guess, Ed to unmute people, but if you want to speak, please advise, and I'll just direct that that you want to speak. The purpose for today's presentation is to cover three things primarily. One is pandemic planning and business continuity. The other is teleworking security challenges. And the third is vendor risk management. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about who I am. And there's a point I also want to make in telling you about who I am. So I'm a lawyer by training. I was a general counsel, head of risk, information security for Direct Edge Exchange, now as part of CBOE. After that, I actually did a startup with a firm called Rahman and Renshaw for, I was the CEO, but I was part of their organization. And in those roles and in the roles that preceded being the general counsel, head of risk, I always was very focused on technology. I was sort of the lawyer who would always bring technology into financial regulation. And obviously that drew me into security, and security became a very driving component of my practice in addition to financial regulation. And as an exchange, we had to obviously address pandemic planning. The exchanges go through effectively a proctology exam. And basically I was the general counsel who brought Direct Edge from being a trading system to a full-blown equities exchange. We became a strategically important infrastructure. Department of Homeland Security was engaged with us, et cetera. So again, our standards had to be much higher. And I raise this because that makes me credible to talk about things like pandemic planning and business continuity planning. Business continuity plans are also a staple of all broker-dealers. They have to have them, and I've advised a large number of broker-dealers in my legal practice. I'm also the founder of Helical, which is a cybersecurity SaaS platform and a service provider as well. And we deliver services actually geared very much toward the remote office environment. It wasn't really the way we set it up. It's just sort of, we have sort of this remote office capability that we've developed product around, as well as cloud, et cetera. And I want to also talk about what I can't talk about. And this is a very important part of the presentation. I'm not a medical practitioner. I can't speak about medical risk. And one of the things that business owners have to consider, and I'm going to raise this point again and again, and honestly, if it's one thing that you take away from this presentation, this may be the most important thing, which is, as a business owner, communicating to your employees, there's going to be a lot of credibility assigned to the information that you give. As you look at COVID-19 and its impact on your life and business, you're also searching for answers. The point being is, understand the authority who's speaking about what it is that's being covered. I've seen a lot of statistical analyses that talk about how the whole country is going to go, statistically, everybody's going to be infected, there's going to be millions of deaths. And I've looked at other statistical analysis that say this is all overblown. Basically, statistics can be managed either way. So I'll pass on that. But as an employer, there's been studies that have shown that employees will put more weight on the truth of what the employer tells them. In other words, the information that you pass on to your employees about COVID-19 will be more heavily weighted statistically, this is based on studies, than even what a medical provider would read, what their family would tell them, even what the news would tell them, for certainly what the news would tell them. So your employees are going to look to your organization to pass on, truthful, credible information. So wear that obligation wisely. Okay, so we're going to jump right into it. So the 4 phases of business continuity and emergency management planning. These are phases, even though it feels like we're in it, I'm going to note that we're actually not in it. We're still building into peak. When you think about what's in front of us, we are now in the build stage. Another week or two, we're going to be in the peak stage. That historically has lasted 4 to 5 weeks. When you look at past pandemics like 1918, et cetera, and then there's post-peak. And that doesn't mean that we don't have oscillating peaks going forward, but it certainly means in terms of looking at this peak, there is an ongoing process that you have to plan for. One is mitigation and prevention, getting ahead of it, thinking of the steps you can take, preparing for those steps. responding to it, which is often going to happen in peak and post-peak, and then the recovery, which is typically post-peak, the return to the new norm. Now, this is just a simple framework, but again, the purpose of this is to sort of help ground you, help you think in terms of how do I approach it? How do I break this into pieces as I think about the impact on my family and my business? So an impact assessment. First of all, and I should have said this up front, at the back of this PowerPoint, I include a number of links to resources. I sprinkle a few in the presentation as well. The idea is that I know that most of you, you can only hear so much. Sometimes you want to take it back, you want to chew on it, you want to contemplate it. So I've included a number of links that talk about each one of these slides that I'm going through, things that you might find helpful, either for furnishing to your employees, for your own edification, for thinking about how you plan for this. But from an impact assessment perspective, and again, I could do a whole presentation much longer on an impact assessment, but the core components of an impact assessment is, number one, understanding what you have in place. This sounds basic. I can tell you, you'd be surprised. I've done a ton of assessments and for clients, and a lot of times the clients just want to kind of move into ranking and addressing gaps. But the taking stock phase is critical to understanding what it is you're actually trying to address. So you look at your policies and programs. Now, a lot of you may say, policies, I don't have a policy. Well, maybe you actually do. Maybe you never wrote it down. Maybe it is written in an email somewhere. But things that policies that drive your operations, that drive how you handle HR, those are things to now pull up and think about, maybe it's time to document them a little bit better and communicate them a little bit better. We'll talk about that. Then you take inventory. Your money, there's been, I know on Monday, James talked about, taking stock of your financials. I think there's going to be other discussions about that. That's not what we're going to cover here today. Your employees, your dependencies, and then you rank them. You try to determine, relationships, deliverables, and your dependencies. If this, then what? That's the question you constantly have to ask yourself. What it is that I'm dependent on? How am I going to provide for it if there's a disruption? Who's going to work on? Who's going to take control? Who has the ownership for that? It may all be you. Why am I going to do it, or when am I going to do it? What is the time frame for me doing it? The simple questions of who, what, where, why, what, and how all apply to this ranking exercise. And then addressing the gaps. Focus on the most important things first, obviously, and then also take the time to review your commitments and your agreements, and address your response capabilities. We're going to talk a little bit more about reviewing your commitments and agreements later, specifically force majeure. And then building. Again, given that we still have a ways to go on this, even post-peak, there's still going to be a lot of concerns about COVID. So think about your policies and checklists, and think about your resource base. Now, what does that mean? Resource base is basically, you have resources here in Morris County Chamber of Commerce. I'm a resource, right? So anybody can reach out to me. I didn't throw my email up, dang it. So I'll have to do that. I'll throw my email up in the chat. You can all pull it from there. But your resource base could also be people who might have left your business, a retiree. You might want to start thinking about, hey, if I'm down a key resource, how am I actually going to, is there somebody who I've worked with before, somebody who might have left that I can call on that can help me out at this time? It's a good time to reach out to that person and start to assess whether or not they'd be able to pinch hit. Because again, as absenteeism arises or people might be impacted by COVID, again, COVID has basically a 2-week cycle. Maybe not serious for the first few days, but then it can really offline an employee depending on the severity of it. And then lastly, and very importantly, test. So a tabletop exercise can feel awkward if you've never done it before. But again, you have a team, you have your stakeholders. A tabletop exercise, just sort of walk through what happens, how you'd respond, and just pretend as if you're dealing with it real time. And then take notes, have somebody take notes. And then after you're done with it, have everybody talk about, on a post-mortem basis, what went wrong. Tabletop exercises, sometimes they sound silly, people don't want to do them, but I've done them a lot in cybersecurity, and I'll tell you, people tell me time and time again that very basic things that they never contemplated came out in a tabletop exercise, because when you're in it, the panic, the stress, the anxiety, it's, having gone through it one time sort of where you're not in that state, it does a world of difference. So highly, highly recommend that. Highly, highly recommend the postmortems. Communication plan. Communication plan is very, very important and not to be neglected. I want to say up front, don't assume that anyone in your organization or your family or your friends, for that matter, gets the seriousness of social distancing. You'd be stunned. My wife is next door over. She is in day 4 of COVID. I will say that I believe that one of the contributors to where she is might have come from people making very uninformed judgments about what they should be doing during a pandemic. Don't assume. In cybersecurity, we see it all the time. I used to discount training. The parallel here is spot on. We have a belief that, some things are so basic. Don't click on like people who you don't know that send you an email, no matter how compelling. You'd be shocked how many people still do this. The same thing with pandemic planning. Do not assume that those around you have the same degree of caution around COVID as you do. Some people will say, oh, it's just if I cough or I sneeze. No, people like to, again, I'm not going to go on a rant on this, but the communication plan is very important for ensuring that your employees know. And you want to be very clear about setting your policies, because if somebody comes into work thinking that it's okay if they just have a cough and maybe a little feverish, but nobody's told them that they shouldn't be coming in. They haven't been actively encouraged to stay home. It's critical that you communicate that, or else you might have that situation and you've never gone out loud with it. So it's very important to start to set the guidelines now, because it's going to carry not just now, but it's going to carry for months. I mean, even after post-peak, we're going to be addressing this. So again, as I said at the beginning, I was going to emphasize communication. Communication is very important. Identify your key decision makers. Designate the right people to communicate that, so you ensure a consistent message. You don't want to have multiple messages. You want to make sure that every employee understands their role from a call tree perspective, from a supervisory perspective. I talk to my reports. I say, you are my reports. Are you having calls every day with your reports? Do people understand what they're doing, what their obligations are? That's how we, so we're having these calls every day. This is how we're touching base. Every employee gets touched. Everybody understands their responsibilities as they go up the chain. Advise your employees and vendors of changes to your policies. Again, I emphasize post-peak. You may have things about like social distancing, about disinfecting. There's any number of things that you would be implementing in place. We're going to cover that. There's also going to be links as well to this. Educate. And then after you advise, also educate. There's some great, CDC puts out some really great fact sheets. I'm going to include links. You can just, PDF them, send them to people. Send them to your employees, send them to your vendors, saying this is what we're doing. So again, as I said before, make sure that you have a single source of truth, that there's consistency in your messaging, that you're using multi-channel. Why multi-channel? Well, because some people don't read emails. So you can send something via text, you can send something via email, you can put it in PDF form. Make sure that people get this. You can talk about it in a Zoom conference call. Again, if you're trying to communicate something very serious to your employees, good to use a multi-channel form. And then also, depending on the size of your workforce, include a confidential reporting mechanism. Somebody has concerns about somebody coming into the office, or somebody themselves is concerned that they might have COVID. You want to keep it, you want to ensure that there's some confidentiality to it so it doesn't cause acrimony. You also want to be thoughtful about the Americans with Disabilities Act in terms of the policies you adopt. And that, I think, will also be covered. There's an attorney speaking tomorrow. I'll touch on it, but it's something that you need to also think about. So your pandemic policies. And before I go, after this slide, I'm going to take a break. And yes, anybody who wants to, you can send me me an email. I'm looking at a question. You can send me an email if you want this PowerPoint, and obviously the links will be active. Eric at helical-inc. Ooh, I did my email wrong. Darn it. Eric at this is what happens when I do this at the same time. It's dash, not underscore. So eric-inc.com, not eric_inc.com. Wow. If you're gonna send out your email, you better get it right? So pandemic policies. So if you're changing your policies, make sure you consider the relevant laws and regulations, specifically around Americans' disability, labor laws, privacy laws. These are all things to consider. One thing that I've heard from other experts and things that I've also dealt with in my own environment, maybe not specifically on pandemic planning, but if you're going to offer something out to your employees, don't offer what you can't maintain. For example, let's say that you're in an environment and you say everybody gets a mask. This is just an example, but you only have enough masks for 3 weeks. What's going to happen in 3 weeks? People are going to be like, there's going to be all kinds of issues. So, and the offering what you can't maintain or not offering what you can't maintain also has legal implications, because it suggests that the measures that you took initially showed that you took an assessment and this was the right way of handling it, but then you didn't maintain it. And then so you fell back, and that was problematic. So if you're not going to maintain it, be very clear up front why this is what we're going to do for this period of time. Then we're going to do something else for this period of time. We're going to scale back, or we're going to allow certain people in, or maybe we're going to stagger the workforce so we ensure social distancing. Right now we're working at home. Later we're going to be staggering it, right? So one of the things that I think everybody has to consider who has employees, all these employees are going home, they're working from home post breach. They may be like, why can't we just work from home? This is so much better. But your environment may not really be conducive to that. It may be important for people to be at work, but maybe it was a little dense before. Maybe social distancing requires some spacing. So I think even in communicating this, you can say, during the build up to peak, during peak, we're going to have a work from home policy, but after we move out of peak, after the stay at home, shelter in place type regulations are lifted, we do intend to move back to an office environment, and we are going to implement different things to ensure that we are maintaining social distancing and taking the right precautions, a safe workplace. We're going to talk about that too. And protecting privacy rights is critical in all of this. Again, there's going to be another call tomorrow. This might be a great topic for them to follow up on. So expect questions. So as you communicate these policies to your employees, expect them to come back to you with questions. Can I stop my employees from going home if they fear exposure? Now, there is a paid leave policy in New Jersey. I think it's 1 hour per 30 hours worked, up to 40 hours a year. You may have an unpaid leave policy, which you may discuss. Balancing that, you may say, listen, it ultimately boils down to a policy, but again, this is where consistency applies. You want to say, here are the employees that need to stay unless they're sick. Our policy is you have to work unless, fear alone isn't enough, but if you feel you have to, maybe there's a paid leave policy for that. After that, it'll be reviewed, but it's consistent across your organization and state the reasons why for it. Can I ask my employees to go home if symptomatic? Yes, but again, in a policy, this is where a policy would become important, because you lay out how you're actually going to address these situations so everybody knows. It also makes people more comfortable to know that other people in the office, if they're sick, you're going to ask them to go home. This is for the benefit of everybody. And can I require my employees to stay home if not symptomatic due to a health concern? Now that's where, again, the ADA comes into play. Why you would be doing it for some versus the others. You may say, well, you're older and you've got pre-existing health conditions, but again, you got to remember ADA. Okay. I said I was going to take a quick question break after that. So anybody have any questions that they want to raise right now on what I've covered? You can just type it in, or you want to share an experience. I know somebody said earlier, hey, I'd like to hear what other people are doing around these. So, we've covered pandemic policies, communications plan, impact assessment. Anybody have anything to share about what they've done, whether it be from an impact assessment, either informal impact assessment or formal communication plan, how it's worked for you, or pandemic policies? Don't be shy. No one's biting. I'm going to wait this one out. Somebody's got to come up. Somebody's got to share. Just type in the group chat. Is Nancy trying to speak?
Yeah. If someone was told to stay home because they were older, she's 70, is there a recourse for that? Because she's been in a situation where the rest of the office is told to go to work, but because she is 75, she was told to work from home, and she's not really equipped to do that.
I think it goes to the overall consistency of the policy. The challenge that you have is when you identify specific employees, it raises a potential discrimination claim. So that's always the challenge. In the context of a health situation, you could, I would say, certainly ask her. The best scenario is you ask somebody to stay, to work from home. But again, if you aren't making a correct provisions for them at home and you expect them to work, now you're starting to get into the ADA. So, and I am definitely not an ADA expert, but I do think it raises some implications. It does raise some implications that you probably, again, I think there's an attorney speaking tomorrow who has labor law experience. I would definitely get on that call and ask them for maybe a little more. But again, that is specifically the type of concern that that would be raised by ADA, age discrimination, certainly, and not having the right resources at home.
Okay.
But again, I think one of the ways that you manage this is a consistent policy. You can, if your policy says that, due to health concerns or what have you, you have the ability to request anybody to stay home. If that's in writing, that arguably should apply to anyone because of their risk factors. And then the question comes in terms of provisions. Now, the person goes home, they don't have any computers, considerations there, but it's a delicate balance. If you request an employee to work from home and explain the reasons, and you don't have right provisions, and they raise, they think it's like unfair, that's where it gets a little trickier, honestly. The best scenario is you put this in a policy, you send it out to everybody sees it. When you speak to the person, you say, listen, these are the risks these are the higher risks that we think you have. We'd like you to stay home. Hopefully that gets you there. If they say it's not fair, that's out of my league. Okay. Anybody else? So, and Len, if anybody wants to speak, anybody else wants to speak, because people are sharing in the chat box here. There's questions about, can we ask somebody to request a negative COVID result prior to returning? And he says he doesn't need a test because he has a fever. Again, if you're adopting a policy that everybody is staying home except essential, another way to do it is to say everybody's staying home except certain essential employees. And then you can designate it. Again, the case where, an employee says he doesn't need a test because he doesn't have a fever, that might be partially an education issue. I think if the person, you can request that the person stays home. If they're not in a protected group, I think you have greater, discretion to indicate that they need to stay home. If you think that they're putting other employees at risk, that certainly increases the bar on that. Again, I think I'm not a labor attorney. So going back to what I said before, again, I'm familiar to a certain extent, but you know, to be 100% correct, you have a labor lawyer speaking tomorrow. I think it's a great question. And I do read the comment about it can be very difficult to get the test if you're not symptomatic, at least now. So yes. Okay, so we're going to continue. Again, these questions are difficult questions, good questions to get ahead of now. And again, I guess I'm selling tomorrow's session as well. Okay, so how do you, and this kind of rolls into our next point, which is how do you protect and prevent spread in the workforce? You actively encourage sick employees to stay home and communicate precautions for household members. Household members is a very big component of it. Again, I told you all that my wife has COVID now. I'm in lockdown for 14 days after I found out. I can't do anything. I got to stay home, and my kids too. I don't know if everybody else is observing those same precautions, but you know, I could be a carrier and not even know it. If I were to go into the office, I could transmit it to others. It's a very difficult question to handle. Are you going to require all employees who have contact with somebody at home who has COVID to not come into work? That's a very, very challenging question, you know, or even actively encourage them to. But again, they could be unknowing transmitters. So you know, and you have to contemplate, you know, one possibility that I've advised certain companies to consider is, you know, and I've done this more for people returning from travel, is to, depends on your environment. If coming into the office is that essential, and maybe it's not now, maybe it's in the future, coming in the office is that essential, you can set up a quarantine area within your office that they can stay in where they have proper social distancing. You have 2 entrances, also works. You know, again, it's a question of, certainly if they have the symptoms, they should go home. But if they have somebody at home or they've been into contact or they've traveled and they're not sure, how do you manage that? So again, these are difficult questions. Unfortunately, there's no set straight answer. Again, separate the sick even at work. Educate, educate, educate. Don't assume the obvious. Do not assume the obvious. Maintain healthy operations. Flexible sick leave. Supporting policies. Think about how you're going to manage absenteeism spikes. At work, make sure people are 6 feet apart, at least in their workspaces. Again, that may have been a contributor to my wife's situation. Maintain healthy work environments, increase ventilation rates and circulation, very important. Open the windows, let the air come in. Open the curtains, let the sun come in. These are important, simple steps. Make sure everybody's got, you know, make sure you're sending out these fact sheets as to what you're expecting the people to do. Washing your hands, happy birthday to you, happy birthday, 20 seconds. Make sure you have the right cleaning supplies at the office. Think about your cleaning people. Are you assuming that your cleaning people are necessarily disinfecting your office when they come at night? Are you assuming that they are not themselves carriers when they come into your office at night? Maybe you have to get the right disinfectant. Maybe you need to leave the right disinfectant around. These are questions maybe you're not dealing with now, but you might have to deal with. You might not be dealing with now because you're at home, but you do want to get back to the office. Advise traveling employees on precautions. That communication plan, make sure that communication plan includes a travel component, and think about how you're handling group gatherings and meetings. Right now it seems easy, but these questions are going to become a little more complicated as we start to move out of peak. So we are now moving on to, I'm going to have to move through this quickly, guys, because I used up my time. So, okay, so home office cybersecurity. Everybody's working from home. What are you doing to secure yourselves? Number 1, your enterprise, your company should have a VPN, and make sure you're updating it. A lot of people get VPNs, they don't update it. There's been a couple of, you know, Department of Homeland Security advisories already about hacking into VPNs by Iranians, by Chinese, by state-sponsored terrorists, Iranian, Chinese, Russian, different groups in those regions. North Korea, of course, is always on the hit list. With those VPNs, make sure that you or who's ever managing it, they're managing the logs, they're detecting attacks, there's an incident response recovery plan in place, device security. You know, listen, people are working from home. Have they updated their antivirus? Very simple. Have they done it? You might be shocked. You know, a lot of 82% of users don't even update the administrative their administrative passwords for their routers. Like a lot of people on this call say, how do I do that? Again, think about, one way to really minimize a risk of like even a key logging. Listen, you could have VPN, you could still have key logging through your device because you use your VPN for work, but use that same computer for personal, and then that could infect the device, and then they could be key logging as you go into the VPN. So what's one of the best ways to avoid this? Multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor, like get it on your phone, get it on your device. Password, something you know, something you have, like your phone. Great way to enhance security. Vulnerability scanning. A lot of people don't do continuous vulnerability scanning. Vulnerability scanning is like what most of the attacks that occur today are a result of existing vulnerabilities that you have and you haven't patched. It's sort of like a requirement for like antivirus. Patch management. Patch management feeds into vulnerability scanning, but you need both. Secure configurations. If you have Windows 10 or you have a Mac, turn on BitLocker, turn on FileVault. It'll automatically encrypt everything. Why wouldn't you? And backup. Now, a lot of people say, oh, I back up on the cloud. Oh, I back up on my computer. No. Get a separate device, back up on that device. Once you're done backing up, remove that device, unhook it from the network. Air-gapped. You want that thing clean. Training. Don't forget training for your team. Training and phishing simulations. Very important. Just like I said before, people need awareness. Don't assume anything. Use multi-factor applications, authentication for applications. Everybody's using conference calls. Everybody's using Zoom. We're using Zoom. Go to meeting. Guess what? Zoom last year had a major problem with their webcam. People were breaking in. There's people, even now when people are sending around links, sometimes the links are going to different people and they're, that you've heard the story about people like throwing porn on a Zoom meeting and getting in on it. So, and even GoToMeeting had its own share of vulnerabilities last year. Teams actually is a little bit better for Microsoft, so something to consider for your internal workplace. But there are security risks, so get that multi-factor authentication and don't think that one single point of security like a VPN is going to protect everything. Last point on this slide, and I'm going to have to move really quick here because I'm going over. Financial transactions over the phone, always. You get an email from the CEO, you get an email from your controller. I need this now, blah, 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 blah. Call. I can't emphasize it enough. Do not, a hacker or somebody who's going to be trying to break into your system, going to get you to transfer money is always going to make it seem urgent. And they may be listening to your conversations and they may know exactly what your boss or when you're the boss or what your CFO is saying. They're going to know. Trust me, they are going to know. This is their one shot. And they're going to make it as strong and hard as they can. Would you believe that a few years ago, I had somebody going back and forth to my controller from my law firm. I fixed that problem. Posing as me. And it wasn't until I got like this email. I'm like, why does she keep asking me about this, large transfer? And basically, she had gone back and she's like all over it. So it can happen to anybody. It can happen to me. I mean, look at that. It's crazy, right? Okay, last thing on this slide. 3 basic rules for online security. So Michael Krebs, great. He's a brilliant on cybersecurity. These are very basic rules for online security. Definitely look at them. Definitely. Very simple. Everybody should be following. Okay. Wow. Now I have hardly any time. So vendor and supplier risk. I'm going to keep blowing through this, but then I'm going to quickly review the resources and I'll be done. Yeah. So Bob Mishi to everyone. Yeah. It's the key logging is a real issue. Thanks, Bob. Understand your vendor risk. Do an assessment of your vendors, as I said before. Also, fourth-party risk. It's real. Don't just go to your vendors. Oh, everything's fine. No. Who are your vendors? Fourth-party risk is a concept we always focus on in cybersecurity. Equally applies in supplier risk here. If your vendor's saying everything's great, but they haven't even done an assessment of who's supplying them, then everything's not great. They don't know everything's great. Great might be ignorance. Understand why your vendor or supplier is saying everything's great. And also review your contracts. Now's the time to review these contracts. Force majeure. Force majeure as an attorney, something we always throw into an agreement. Hardly gave any thought. Curiously, over the last couple of years, I've been thinking more about it because of cybersecurity, and my force majeure clauses are anything but boilerplate. But what are the key questions I ask now? What is force majeure, first of all? I'm not going to jump into it. What is force majeure? Force majeure is the unforeseen and what it does to your contract when the unforeseen happens. Pandemic plans are often specifically listed, and certainly I don't think anybody is going to say, no, that wasn't a pandemic plan, COVID-19. It is a force majeure event, let's face it. But when does the force majeure event trigger? What triggers it? Pure declaration? Does it have to have an impact on the business, on your vendor? What is the responsibility to mitigate during a force majeure event? How do you come out of a force majeure event? How do you ensure quality and security during a force majeure event? Like if they're managing data for you and it's a force majeure event, does that security doesn't matter anymore? These are very difficult questions. These are questions you should try to understand. Also, another big thing, a lot of people think like, oh, my vendor always supplies me everything to be fine. Really? If there is a dependency that your vendor has, and now they have to ration it, who has priority? Even bandwidth, you're seeing like, cuts in bandwidth now on certain traffic. Who has priority to that? You need to understand that because it might impact your business. I encourage a partnership with vendors to mitigate. In terms of thinking on the supply chain side, here are some things that might be more, the supply chain comments might be more typical to a manufacturer. You engage your suppliers early, you look at your inventory, you understand those key parts. I'll say, listen, I got to be careful because I'm out of time, but like particularly for small businesses, small manufacturing concerns, where they may need a single part or, but it's critical. There have been some cases that I've been following up on where people have actually used 3D printing to create a part that they were previously relying to get from China or elsewhere, and that supply chain has been disrupted, but 3D printing allowed them to sort of recreate that part and progress. So that's a way of innovating out of this, and maybe having a more sustainable process going forward. Okay, so now I'm kind of done. Anybody else have anything they want to share? Because again, we wanted to make sure we had time for people to share on cybersecurity, on vendor risk, keeping the workplace safe.
Everybody has been unmuted. If you want to ask a question, you can do so at this time.
Yeah, it's a little chilly, but it's okay. You went for a
Well, we're hearing somebody else's conversation. So if anybody wants to speak, let me know. Certainly feel free to share because I think people want to hear what other people are going through. Don't be shy.
I've been doing research all morning on how to safely do grocery shopping. So that's been my day. But
okay.
I feel like that could be something that maybe we should communicate to other people. Like, hey, my dad mentioned to me, hey, make sure to wipe your shoes down before you come back inside the house because it can get carried on the bottom of your shoes. And I hadn't thought of that. So little things like that, maybe we could share more.
Yeah, so it's a good point. It's, a lot of us now, our primary vector for exposure is the grocery store. Getting I'll say smart move might be to get that pickup slot early before you need to, because they're about a week and a half out, and getting deliveries, good luck with that. That's number one. Number two, I try to stay away from 24-hour stores because, I'd like to come in when the virus isn't potentially in the air. And also I actually posted something in Facebook that I'm now going to, I've gotten a lot of favorable response about the aisles, the narrow aisles in supermarkets. If grocery stores would make all narrow aisles go one way, that would reduce face-to-face contact. Some people have said, well, CDC says, 10 minutes of contact, 6 feet or more. Honestly, if we can limit people going face-to-face in an aisle where they don't have to, that would probably, give people a lot of peace. I throw that out there in case you are at a grocery store and you've noticed it in the aisles, how like people are crossing each other and congesting and not comfortable. Again, minor thing, but there it is. Any other comments like on security or vendor risk management? A lot of people are quiet. Anything you'd like me to cover more? I spent a lot of, obviously I have a business. I focus on small to medium-sized businesses, cybersecurity. I'll say this for this group, and this is a pure freebie, so you get a freebie out of this. We also do dark web monitoring. Basically, we look to see whether people's domains have been essentially hacked, because basically what happens is hackers steal domains, they steal passwords, they sell them online. So your data may be breached, your password may be breached. It's always a good idea to know whether or not you fall into that category. If anybody has, I can't do it on Gmail, but if anybody has like a business domain and they want me to do dark web research to see whether people in your organization has been hacked, I can do so. So send me a note, I'll do it for free. Just anything to kind of help people get a little more secure at this time. It's the least I can do. So that's an honest to goodness offer. And yeah. And the other thing I think, I don't know if I mentioned it, is if people around you have been exposed to coronavirus and they're feeling pretty good and it's day 4, day 5, day 6, mind you that the time where most of the hospitalizations occur happens in day 7 or 8, or the acute respiratory syndrome. It's generally around day 8 or 9 is when your body is developing the antibodies that they're starting to kick in. But don't be too confident if it's day 6 and somebody's feeling great. Wait till day 7, day 8 passes. That's what they're seeing in the hospitals. Again, my wife is a nurse practitioner. She's very close to it, and obviously now she's much more close to it. Okay, so resources. I've included a lot of checklists here. Business planning checklist, business continuity checklist, general guidance on planning for COVID. And again, a lot of these things I pulled from CDC and OSHA. I like a lot of their resources. The ready.gov has some good information on it too. But there's a lot of information, hard to figure out what to weight. I love the fact sheets. They're great, even hand washing. Please send out hand washing. People think, oh, but everybody knows hand washing. No, trust me. There are still people out there who just aren't doing it. They don't get it. I don't know why, they just refuse. Got to keep chipping away. This is a symptoms testing guide by that the CDC puts out. How to help prevent the spread if somebody in your house gets COVID. Travel notices from CDC, very important for post-peak. Financial assistance for businesses. I know this has been covered elsewhere. Also, Morris County has done a good, the MOCC has done a great job of kind of keeping people up to date, Megan's emails and such. Again, all this is going to be available. And then if you really want to make yourself crazy, you can go to the Johns Hopkins Scary COVID map. Again, just so we're not forgetting about influenza, there's activity map there. And then also, I also threw on, even though this is from Business Insider, I like it because it sort of talks about what to expect in the symptoms. And so, just for you to review again, day 7 to 8 are sort of the critical days from what we're seeing. Not me particularly, but what the hospitals are seeing. So I throw this on here because it sort of touches on that. I don't have anything else. If anybody has any questions, please speak up. I know I'm over, so sorry.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming on. Eric, great job. The chamber is keeping busy. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to have seminars, Zoom at noon, just like we did today. Eric did a great job. Tomorrow, we also have Family First, Coronavirus Response Act, what employers need to know. That's going to take place tomorrow at 12 noon. So we hope that you will connect with us. And we already have another 2 weeks booked of great speakers that will help us navigate through this difficult time that we're all facing together. So I want to thank everybody for logging in. Thank you for being a part of our Zoom. And if there's anything the chamber can do, please don't hesitate. Just send us an email. Let us know. We're here to better serve you. Again, Eric, thank you so much for your time. Great presentation. And I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you all. Stay safe.